And while everyone's getting their audio set up, Douglas, I'm just going to go over a few quick housekeeping tips for everyone, let you know a little bit more about what you can expect in the next 30 minutes before I pass it over for Douglas to take over. Just wanted to let you all know this is a 30-minute session and it is interactive. Douglas is going to have time at the end of his session to answer any of your questions and to chat live. So please make sure to stick around for that. And we hope you'll be able to turn your cameras on and be part of the conversation. When it does come time for Q&A, feel free to unmute yourself and jump right in, or you can drop it down into the chat or even use the raise hand function that you can find in the participants area. So feel free any of those ways and we'll make sure that your questions can be addressed. And just a reminder, these sessions are being recorded and they will be posted to the SaaStr YouTube channel as well as shared with you after, along with the slides. So definitely will be a great resource for you to reference later or also share with anyone else that may not be able to join. And then just a final reminder, we hope that you've already been able to take advantage of the Brella one-on-one networking tools. But if not, you have the rest of today and all day tomorrow to do that as well. So I'm going to drop the link down in the chat, but definitely hope that you can take advantage of that. There have already been some amazing conversations so far today and really excited for everyone to take advantage of that. Okay, a few more people just coming in. Thank you so much for joining. And for everyone that just joined, Douglas is going to have time for Q&A at the end, so please get your questions ready to join that conversation. Douglas, without further ado, feel free to go ahead and take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Taylor. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon or morning, wherever time zone you're in. I'm Doug Hanna. I'm the COO of a company called Grafana Labs. We're in the observability space, so we work with developers, engineers, and folks like that on helping them get better visibility into their systems. Relevant maybe for this audience and what this discussion is about. Grafana is about a 250 person company. We're remote first. We're a Series B stage company. We have people all over the world. And then before Grafana, I worked at Zendesk for about 4 years, most recently running operations there, where I dealt a lot with kind of OKRs and company planning and strategy, that sort of stuff. And then prior to that, entrepreneur twice, one successfully, one not so successfully. So have kind of seen a couple different things, a couple different company stages. And today's talk is all about how do you scale your company as the product. So we talk a lot about products themselves and scaling our product and being ready for enterprise and being ready for mid-market, et cetera. But we don't tend to talk as much about the company itself. And I tend to think of if you're an operations person or a CEO, that you can think of your company effectively as a product that you scale. So there's this graphic that I like, product management, which is really like, if you think about the job to be done of like a car or a transportation device, there are a bunch of different ways to build that. So probably the suboptimal way is you start with the wheel, and then you go 2 wheels, then you have kind of half a car, and then eventually you have 4 cars. But if you kind of think about it more broadly, and you have this broader job to be done, like maybe you start with a skateboard, and then you go to a scooter, and then a bike, and then a motorcycle, and then a car. Like they all help accomplish a discrete transportation goal without kind of being restricted in the way that the above examples are. So like similar to with any sort of product, you want to start small, kind of build your capabilities. And as you get more advanced, you'll be ready to proceed and eventually get that fully featured kind of end state. So I'm going to use these examples a couple times, and we'll talk about like what's a skateboard and what's a car for a couple different processes. And it's about thinking about scaling your company. And then we can have a discussion as a group around maybe how some of you have done that with your own teams. So this is another kind of product development example. This is really like lean product development where you start with something small. It's all about delivering value, kind of measuring things, thinking about how you continuously improve. And the same is going to apply to really how you build your company processes and how you operate your company versus like your kind of waterfall development where you ship this big perfect thing, ideally at the end. It rarely works out like that. And then you look to go forward with it. So the goal is how do we do this in an incremental way, in a lean way, and then really advance it from there. So I think the first thing I really talk about is like, what are you solving for? And I always try to remind folks of this. And I talk to a lot of like it's off people and people like that. Like you don't want to build process just to add process like that. That usually gets you in a bad place. So when you think about that, kind of related to that is don't be dogmatic. So like goals versus OKRs versus V2 mom, like in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. I talk to a lot of people kind of trying to build goals programs at their companies, and they always like this is a common question. And my suggestion is like it doesn't really, or my answer is it doesn't really matter. It's all about what you're trying to solve for. And like similar, like if you're talking about all hands process, like weekly versus monthly versus quarterly with rotating versus static agenda, like the details are a little less important. And if you over engineer the process, you're going to alienate people. And kind of like the Schitt's Creek if you're like you're going to have people that are going to be like, hey, I don't want to participate in this, or this is stupid, or this isn't resonating with me. And if you over engineer it, that's a lot more likely to happen. And I really like you want to think about these processes as a business leader trying to achieve an outcome, not as like a process person trying to design a perfect process. Like the end state is not that you have a perfect goals program. The end state is something else. And when we go through a couple examples, we'll talk about this. So let's look at a goals program as an example. I think this is one of the kind of key programs that like an ops team or an ops function or a business leader thinking about growing your team and function should really think through. And again, I'm going to try and apply this like skateboard to car framework. So again, like the key outcome, like starting with that, is like I think a good goals program is going to create dialogues around what's important and seeing people work towards the same set of priorities. If you're kind of a great goals program is not one in which like every goal itself or key result, et cetera, is like perfectly defensible in the Supreme Court. Like that's not the objective of the goals program. It's really just get people talking, get people understanding what the priorities of the business are. So if you think about that, like maybe the V1 of the V1 for an earlier stage company is like your company priorities for a month or a quarter. Like just writing down like, hey, here's what we want to accomplish this month or this quarter. These are the most important things to us. Again, it gets people talking about what those priorities are. The next step could be, okay, let's apply like an OKR framework and talk about that for the quarter. And again, it's a quarter, it's not a month, it's not a day, it's not a year. Thinking about like, okay, how is it? Let's look a couple months out and just think about what our priorities are in that period. Maybe the next step, and this is kind of starting to the journey that when I joined Grafana, we were about 70 people. We really just started with our company-wide OKRs. And then our next step was, okay, our leadership team set quarterly OKRs. And that was like, we didn't ask the whole company to set it on week one, but we kind of proved and we got people bought in at kind of the leadership level. And then you see maybe all employees set OKRs each quarter. And that's kind of like, that's a pretty mature stage. Your motorcycle is getting people pretty far at that point. And then finally, like, then you think about like a goal narrative and some like more overarching document to explain the broader context of what you're trying to accomplish. All employees are going to set OKRs, and you probably spend a decent amount of time on like alignment between different employees and functions. And that's all really important when you're at a much more mature stage of setting OKRs. It's similar to like your product that maybe just starts as like a very lightweight thing to do X and then eventually gets very sophisticated. Think about your goals program the same way and all kind of focused on those key outcomes. Company-wide comms, another thing that I think people think a lot about as their company scales. Like as we've scaled Grafana from 70 to 250 people in the last year and a bit, this has had to scale a lot for us. So kind of our key outcome was what's important. We want people to know what's important to them in terms of like what they need to do every day and what their role in the business is, and to the business overall. Like if I work in finance, I probably don't have a lot of insight into what's important in engineering or vice versa. And we need to make sure that different people understand like what's important to the business overall and how that affects them. And then ideally done successfully, I create some alignment kind of across the company. So the skateboard version of that is you have like occasional all hands meetings. They have ad hoc agendas. They're probably scheduled sort of randomly when it's like, hey, we have something we want to talk about and that we're thinking about. Like that was when I joined Grafana, we were pretty light on process. That's what we had. And that's okay. Like I think for an earlier stage company, that's fine. And then you scale it out, like monthly all hands meetings. Like let's put it on the calendar, let's commit to doing it every month. And then you have more set agendas. It's not a really rigid thing. You're not going over like an extensive KPI deck every time. Like that's okay too. Finally, like you might want to break out your all hands meeting. So a common one that I've seen is you start getting like a people manager all hands, and you talk about things that might be more relevant to a group of people managers and leaders in the business, as well as kind of just broader all hands meetings for all employees. And perhaps your next place is something where async team updates can happen. So that might be like email kind of newsletter type things to all staff or different Slack channels or something like that. But again, it's a step in advanced communication where if you're a smaller team, it's probably over engineering it. And if you're a lighter weight team or you're a larger team, now there's a lot more things that are happening and it's much more difficult for any single individual to keep up with it. And then finally, and this could go into like airplanes and aircraft carriers of company-wide communications, if you want to continue this this example here, but like maybe you get into team and department all hands and quarterly kickoffs and things like that. Like there's so many things you can do around company communications, but you can imagine if like you're a 25-person team and someone like me comes in and is like, well, we should really start with team and department all hands, and then we should do a quarterly all hands and a sales kickoff and all this other stuff. People are going to be like, holy crap, like you have way too much stuff that you're trying to do and way too much stuff that like this isn't appropriate for our size company. And it goes back to, again, to the key outcomes and really accomplishing what you're setting out to accomplish as a business. So other examples in the left-hand column, kind of your skateboard, and your right-hand column, your heavy kind of car approaches. So let's talk about some of these. So budgeting is a super common, generally finance-driven process. And really, early stage companies will not have a mature finance function, and that's okay. Budgeting, like think about it as rough plan of spending priorities, management of spend above a certain amount, probably some sort of lightweight process to improve headcount. Like that's going to be the main needle movers. Whereas if you are a mature company, you're going to do a monthly like budget versus actuals. You're going to have much better, much more robust tracking of spending across the major categories. You're going to think about a planning process that does both bottom-up planning as well as top-down, and tries to reconcile that. There's a lot of space in between those, and if you skip from one or the other too drastically, it's going to cause issues. Metrics and analytics is another really common one. I think it's a really good idea to go over a few key metrics each week, add some data to a BI system, start looking at it on a regular basis, just kind of operationalizing this idea of like, hey, we're looking at our metrics, we're trying to understand them. And then that gets into like full operational reviews, multiple levels of metrics and analysis, data and analytics team. Like there's a lot you can do certainly in this area over time, and as your company gets larger. And we had a lot of that at Zendesk when we were like multi-thousand person company, but it's a lot less relevant to us at Grafana. It's a 200 something person company. Same thing with product launches. Like your first version of your product launch is probably like a blog post or a tweet or something, and maybe an internal FAQ if you're like really on top of it. And then product launches at mature companies, like the furthest extreme is like, think of like Apple, where they have these beautiful high fidelity keynotes and press and all this other stuff. Like that's way beyond probably what anyone in this audience is even thinking about. But maybe you do get to like product marketing decks and demo kits and webinars and press and all this other stuff. Like you want to increment these over time. And if you think of like each of these different processes effectively as a roadmap for how you're going to accomplish that as your company continues to scale and the company gets more complex, it will really help kind of make it a lot more attainable and a lot more actionable. The final kind of thought here is your teammates or customers too. Like, don't be afraid to use pilots. How can I reduce the scope of this is a great question. So maybe we'll start it with one team or one segment of the team, like the leadership team only. You want to iterate and learn. You want to ask for feedback. Like I always talk about these processes as we're going to learn from them. You're going to want think about each initiative having maybe a Slack channel or similar kind of open forum for questions and feedback. Encourage that dialogue, send surveys, ask people like, hey, did the OKR process work for you this quarter? What could we do better? What would you like to see be done differently? And then like start with a general tool that your team already uses before you graduate to a dedicated tool. Like it really is sad to see the process that is probably well designed, well thought of, and actually needed in the business, like die because of a poor tool implementation or die because people aren't used to it. So start with something that's much more general and kind of broadly applicable, critically that your team already uses. And then you can graduate to a dedicated planning tool or OKR tool or whatever the appropriate project is. So my top takeaways, your company's key processes are going to evolve over time. Don't be dogmatic about the process. It's all about the business outcome. And finally, treat your teammates like customers and ask for feedback. So if you're asking them, you'll hopefully get some honest feedback and really be able to take that to the next level. So that's a little bit about kind of scaling your company as a product and thinking about it with a product mindset. I have some questions here for this group, and feel free to maybe unmute yourself and to speak up. I think the group is small enough where we can do that. If you feel like you have a particular story to share. Otherwise, we can move into more general Q&A as well. So I'll start with for companies that have goal processes, and if you don't, I'm curious to know maybe why. How have they evolved over time? So if anyone's particularly passionate about that, feel free to speak up. Or nobody has a goal process, and no one wants to talk about it. So possible. Martin, I saw you came on.
Douglas, I usually just like to wing it. I don't really believe in goals. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm willing to chat about our startup's goal process because we're doing this right now for FY21 planning. So I'm CEO of Draft. We're an FP&A platform, and we do budgeting and forecasting. So we're helping people do all these revenue models, but now we've grown from like 10 to 30 people over the last year. And I can't just be like, hey, do this, do this, do this. And we need to communicate, and everyone's working from home. So we've rolled up a lot of what you talk about with OKRs and then cascading that through and aligning and rallying everyone around a theme, and then being able to then have that drive all the decision making for what we do in product, what we do for hiring and people in process here. So a lot of what you're showing there.
Is that
and we couldn't.
Sorry, does that theme change quarterly, or is the theme reliability or scalability or something like that? How general or specific is the theme?
For example, we just did our Series A, so now our investors expect us to scale. So we did all the unscalable stuff before, all the hacky stuff you have to do to get to that level, and then now it's all right, we actually have to create stuff so that all of our leaders now went we went from 0 to 1 last year and all those functions, and now it's those people are going to player coaches, and how do they scale themselves through tools, through process, through being able to delegate and go from there. So that's our rallying theme on the year is all about time to values for everything that we do within the app, within the company, within each of the teams, and speed for scale.
Nice, I like that. Cool, thanks for sharing. Dane, you were going to time in some thoughts on how you wing it, how that's led to tremendous success.
Well, I don't know if I'm the best use case. I mean, I just find that as my teams have evolved, the goals become much less lone wolfy and more discussion based. And I find the goals that have enough time to breathe. I think of a goal as a tree, the seeds planted and then it's brought to the team as discussion. And if there's enough patient attention put on it, it can kind of grow into the tree and grow deeply into each person. And then it actually becomes a reality. The goals of success before I ever start in that case, because long story short is the goal becomes more of a discussion than a written down thing.
And does that imply that the goal kind of stays true maybe for multiple quarters or months or planning periods versus hey, this is something we want to get done between January and March?
Well, I think the goal kind of stays the same, but the few voices transform it to a SMART goal times 2, as opposed to if I did it alone.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a good kind of outcome of this. Like I said, people are talking about it and you're getting bought into it versus just like this, hey, I'm sharing the goal for you as a company, and like please follow this. Like it becomes much more collaborative. Awesome.
It's a very different energy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very different like conversation and set of outcomes if people feel bought into it. Cool. Next one is like, do companies here have a planning cadence, maybe besides just goal setting? Like I think a lot of companies just start with goal setting, and that's totally fine. But curious if companies have embraced some sort of planning process beyond just OKRs or similar goal setting. A lot of times this will start with like a product roadmap and a planning process for a product roadmap. And then you can see that like, okay, then we're going to do some like good old conference driven development where we have a big event maybe once or twice a year that we're trying to align to. That was how that started at Grafana largely, is what are we going to build to hit our next kind of 6-month major kind of conference event. But curious if other companies have taken a similar or different approach.
I haven't got my video shared, but we actually are following, I don't know if you know, like David Sachs has a cadence that he pushed out. So we
yeah,
kind of
mentioned that maybe a month or two ago.
Yeah, so we do exactly that cadence with a bit of modification, obviously, and a bit more fleshed out than what he has.
Yeah, I guess maybe probably not everyone here is familiar with it. Do you mind just explaining it a little bit?
Yeah, so there's sort of like 2 calendars that kind of snap together, and the first there's sort of 2 key events. The first one is a sales kickoff event, and at that event is sort of talking about what are the product roadmap features that are coming out later on in the half of the quarter, aligning all the sales folks about, hey, what are the new products coming out, how are we going to price them. Any of the customer success folks join that first call, and then we typically bring in like a guest speaker or someone to make it fun. And we brought in a rapper called Harry Mack in the first time we ran it. That was really cool. And then what we then do is the next piece of it is the product launch event, which is I think of an Apple event, but a million times less exciting.
Yeah,
because of the budget. And so that sort of goes on mid-quarter, and then we invite our customers to that event. Okay. And then everything else kind of revolves around it.
And you're doing that every quarter, so 4 times a year?
Yeah, so we've done it. We've tested it out for the first time in Q4 this year, and then went pretty well. And we're doing that next year.
Yeah, that's great. And then I think how large is your company just in terms of?
We're about 70 people.
Cool. Yeah, I imagine as you all get, it's great that you can do that on like a quarterly basis too, that you're kind of that agile. I imagine when it gets a little bigger, it'll be more like a semi-annual or annual basis.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Other Q&A about kind of goals or company planning or scaling. I'm going to kind of take the slides off here and probably I can see folks better. But any other kind of questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Douglas. Do you find that the planning process is like boring, or like I guess that'd be my initial question is, did you ever find it boring, and did it become more fun as you got more used to it? Or
yeah, I think as the person facilitating it, I try to be honest that this is like OKR planning and things like that is not like probably most people's idea of a good time. You can do things to try and make it a little bit more fun and exciting. Like at Zendesk, I would give our kind of monthly OKR updates with like a very gift-filled presentation and try and make it fun and accessible for the employee audience. But like with my peers on a leadership team, I'm like, yeah, it's tough and a little tedious, but it's super important, and like it's a good use of our time. It's a good investment of our time. So my strategy is to try and just be honest about that, and I think people get it. Hopefully, it's not like I want to like stab my eyes out at the end of it. I don't think it's that bad, I'm sure people would rather watch something on Netflix than participate in the planning process.
Cool. I guess I'll wait and see if anybody else has any other questions. I tend to jump in too fast, and I want to give other people a chance.
Sure. Any other questions from the group?
I've got one more. You mentioned about, these different levels of detail you could go on. Have you found any great OKR software or platforms that just, scale? Like, I know there's a bunch of them out there, but, one that you're just like, for a high growth company that worked really well.
Yeah, I've used a bunch. We did a trial of BetterWorks at Zendesk. It was pretty good. We used Workday goals for a while. We're at Grafana, we're using a tool called 15.5, which does more like all the goal tools are kind of broader than just goal setting. They want to do performance reviews and check-ins and things like that. Lattice is another one. I think they're all pretty good. They're all fine. I don't think any of them like unlock some magical like goal process engagement. That would be nice if it did, but I think they're really like, it's helpful to have a place to organize it, but if starting with like Google Docs or Google Sheets works for your company, like I wouldn't argue against that either. So the short list, I would say, like, depending, probably in ascending order for company size would be like 15.5, Lattice, BetterWorks. Like, I think any of those three could be pretty good, and are probably worth evaluating if you're looking for a goal / holistic performance management tool. Any other questions? Okay, great. If anyone has any follow-up questions, you can find me on Twitter, which is my whole name, Douglas Hanna. Or if you want to email me, which is doug@grafana.com. I'll post that in the chat here. So feel free to reach out.
I have one question, Douglas.
Yeah, go for it.
When would you say that planning is actually an interference with productivity?
A great question. Usually that I hear from planning cynics, but I think if you feel like you're spending more time planning the business than operating the business, and or if planning the business is getting in the way of operating the business, your ratio is probably off. Another thing I would think about too is like the effectiveness of your planning. So if you're planning for A, B, and C to happen, and then like 3 months later, X, Y, and Z happens, you're probably not at like a company-wide level of maturity to be able to like really go through a robust planning process. So for example, like, I don't know, a company like Apple could probably do a 5-year plan and it would be credible and they generally would follow it.